Hi, welcome back to Awesome Metrics series. In this video, we're going to start looking at creating that architecture diagram. I like working with the draw diagrams or draw.io. There are various things I like about it. It's first of all, it's free. I could go and import whatever the icons I want. So in this case, like as you could see, I could go and import all the fabric icons. And I think probably one of the best thing I like about is, for example, if I draw a shape like this, I could change this into sketch. And I love that uneven lines. And that's why I like it. But anyway, I'm not going to use this web version. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use a desktop version that I have installed on my Mac. So from previous video, we know we have weather API data, and then we have some other data that we need to be able to get the latitude and longitude information. So these are basically our data sources. And then we want to bring this data into Fabric. And that's our very simplified architecture diagram. So from our previous video, we know we need a workspace in our Fabric. So that's the workspace. I'm calling it their workspace, but it's a Awesome Metrics. And we need a notebook to be able to import the data from the Dev API and also the other data sources that we want to bring that one. But when we're importing the data in, we need to save the data somewhere. So we are going to use the lakehouse to put that data. Whenever we create a lakehouse in Microsoft Fabric, it automatically creates a default semantic model, and we also have a SQL analytics endpoint. And then all these notebooks that we have in there, if we want to orchestrate those notebooks, we need a pipeline to be able to execute these notebooks at particular time of the day or particular time of the week or things like that. So these are the various operations I need for my ingestion layer. There's probably, I may do some data profiling and things like that, but I could just use semantic model to do that data profiling. And again, I could just use another notebooks to do that type of data profiling to understand what type of data I'm working with. This whole thing that I need for my ingestion layer, to put that into one folder, and I'm going to call that folder as an ingestion for layer. So that's because for this project, I am decided to go for only one workspace, then going for having a separate workspaces for each layer. I personally feel like that works nicely, especially when you have a smaller team or individuals working on in a whole solution. But sometimes when there are very big teams and there are working on a really large projects, probably having multiple workspaces for each layer may work. But however, on top of it, if you want to use the deployment pipelines, and which is important to use, and if you have a dev, UAT, and prod, those kind of things, then it's gonna become very messy, and we're probably gonna have too many workspaces. So I prefer having all the things in one workspace and categorize them by using the folders within the workspace, and following the right naming conventions makes this whole process much more easier. Check out my blog on the naming conventions, how I follow the naming conventions when I'm creating the solutions, and you will see those naming conventions as part of the developments as well. Okay, so this is the folder where I'm going to do the ingestion, and the rest of the things very similar to ingestion layer. So we're going to have very similar format for the validation layer, and we're going to have the very similar format for the curation layer, except in the curation layer we're going to have a semantic model, and also I'm going to use some Power BI reports on top of that semantic model. When it comes to the curation layer, instead of using the default semantic model, I am actually creating a separate customized semantic model and then creating the Power BI reports on top of that semantic model. So the question comes why this architecture than going into any other architecture? Why only these items instead of using some other items that's available in Microsoft Fabric? The notebook, using of notebooks is solely because the weather API nicely provides me open the Python script, which means I could just copy and use that existing Python script, existing Python library, and ingest data into Fabric much quicker. And I'm also quite comfortable using notebooks. So that's the reason I kind of went for notebooks. And then the lakehouse is something, again, like, if I want to do much more SQL, then probably I would go for a warehouse. But I do want to work with the Delta files, and I want to use the direct lake on top of it later when it comes to my curation layer. So I am happy to just go for lakehouses. Again, it's just not because of the direct lake functionality, because I could use direct lake with warehouse as well, but solely because I am more comfortable working with the lake houses than the warehouses. So that's why I'm going for that. And for the orchestration, obviously there is the data factory pipelines. Using the separate semantic model is, again, very much for to have that control and to be able to make changes by using the semantic link labs and having like a more control on my semantic model. That's why I'm going for a separate semantic model. Again, I think it's a best practice to go for a separate semantic model than you just using the default semantic model. I'll talk more about that when we come to that module. And then obviously the Power BI report. So my choice of the tool set within the tool set, so like, working with the notebooks and the lakehouses is kind of what inspired this architecture. But obviously, depending upon how comfortable somebody is, the architecture changes. There are various other elements we usually include in the architecture perspective. For example, the security, the user access control, and how you're distributing, who has the access, like a deployment pipeline, so the Git integration. There's so much more details that we could put into the architecture. For now, I'm not going to put all those things. But if it comes, we will come back to this architecture diagram and start adding more elements during our next modules. Let's see how this works. So what we have here is we have two notebooks, one to get this extra information around countries so that we have lat and lang, and then we have the weather data notebook where we call the API based on the lat and lang from the countries data to get the weather information for all the selected cities for the specific date and time. And we're going to keep this data, we're going to orchestrate this data, all these pipelines, by using the data factory pipelines. And then we're going to keep this data into two lakehouses. One is monitoring lakehouse and one is the ingestion lakehouse. The monitoring lakehouse, I'll talk more about this in the later modules, but basically what this lakehouse is to capture this extra logging information for our solution. So it captures the information like how many rows has been inserted, who executed the notebook or something like that, or like how long it took. This extra logging information is very useful when it comes to the maintenance of this entire solution. We'll talk more about that later. So we have the two lakehouses where we are keeping the data. One is where we are reading and writing, and then the monitoring warehouse is where we are just like, inserting data into the lakehouse. The next thing that comes is we're going to read the data from our ingestion layer by using more notebooks. And here, like, this is where we are transforming our data. We are making sure we are getting only the columns that we need, and we are getting only the columns. There are no duplicates and all sorts of we're transforming the data, giving it a shape and all that stuff, because in the ingestion layer, it is a very raw format, and this is where we have the transformed and validated format. So again, we are using the notebooks to do that process, and also I'm including the date table, which would be useful for my calculations for my presentation layer or in my semantic model. And again, these notebooks also writes the data into monitoring lakehouse, again capturing the same logging information like we previously did in the ingestion layer. And I'm orchestrating again these notebooks by using the data factory pipelines. So we could make a design choice about, do you want to orchestrate by using one data factory pipeline, or do you want to have like a multiple? In this case, I'm kind of went for two. It's a design choice. To be honest, it's okay to go for just one, but I went for two. We'll see what we do at the end of it, but just for the architecture diagram's sake, I have two. And then I'm going to read and write the data into a validated lakehouse. So this is where I'm giving a structure, I'm giving the right column names, and like excluding the columns I don't need, as I mentioned, like deduplications and things like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create shortcuts into a different lakehouse. It's a small project, and there's one person who is working on this project and all those things. But I think having this a separate lake house for the curation layer, I think it's very nice when it comes to the real life scenarios. For example, if you want to separate data engineering tasks and the end user activity tasks, then having this kind of a separate lake house where you have the shortcuts coming from your validated layer, which makes it easy for, like, you could control the access. Like, you don't want your end users to go and tinker with your data engineering side of the business. Then this, I may, like, actually keep this curated lakehouse into a different workspace, and then give my end users, my power users, or my self-service BI users, give access to only to that workspace, and they don't have access to anything before that. So that is probably something that I could do in the real life scenario. In this case, I'm not doing that one, but I'm designing the solution by thinking in that kind of scenario. So what we have here is I have another lake house where I am doing the shortcuts for my curated tables from my validated lake house. And here on top of this curated lake house, I'm creating a semantic model. Instead of using the default semantic model, I'm creating a separate semantic model, and I'm going to update that semantic model by using another notebook, which is probably most of the case it's going to be one-off notebook. I'm not going to put that one in a pipeline or anything. It is more to have the, like, as a developer, when I'm designing it, I would go and update things related to that semantic model, so only the developer would have access to it. And then I'm going to create the Power BI reports on top of it. So the whole concepts in this one is happening within the one workspace. And I am separating that by using the folders. So all the ingestion elements is going to kind of sit in the ingestion folder, and then all the validated kind of elements are happening in the validation folder, and then all the curated kind of things are happening in the curated folder. So when I'm doing it for my clients, again, it changes massively depending upon various factors when you go to a real life scenario. But however, just imagine if that is kind of what I wanted to do, then I would probably move this semantic model into this place, because if I don't want my client to have access to any of this, like, notebooks and pipelines and all those things, I will keep that clean, and they will have access to only the items over here. And as I mentioned previously, I'll keep this into one workspace and this into this curation layer into another workspace, so that as an end user, I could control who have access to what workspaces. But in this solution, I'm not doing that multiple workspaces. I'm kind of keeping everything into one workspace. Now we know how our solution is going to look like and how everything kind of works together as well. So now let's go and create it. I'll see you in the next video.